What do I say? Oh, Craig's here. Welcome everybody to I think it's the 17th of April. Gosh. It's the 18th of April in Australia, and it's the 17th of April in the year of shielding our Lord 2024, unshielding. And we're in the Broom Discord, and this container is called Roundup. And for as long as it continues to exist, it will be, I'll say, like a container which is sort of like a town hall for the community that we call the Broom. And its sort of stated intention is to be a place where we can talk about what's coming up in the Broom in the last week or so. And I won't say it's always like a very accurate or precise I'll say like exemplification of that intention, but I will say I always have fun. And yeah, I guess I'm just curious. I'm here with some number of people who tend the Broom and who are members of the Broom. And I'd love to hear from y'all how you're doing before we jump into a topic that we previously discussed.
Doing well. This is Adam. Thanks for asking, Nobu.
Thanks for checking in, Adam. I can read out the chat. Psychonaut says broomed up on a Wednesday. I don't know what that means. It sounds positive. It feels positive. It sounds positive in my body mind. So I'm glad that it sounds positive. You might be suffering, but please disagree. Broomtacular. That's more like it. So yeah, I'm still holding space for y'all to check in. Yeah, you can't spell broom without bro, so that makes sense to me as well. Hold on. I guess like I'll say like before we dive into a topic that I feel like it's been coming up in the Broom for a really long time, but I feel it's sort of cresting as a topic to discuss in this container. I'll just say that a couple of things are happening in Broomland. I've never used that term before. I feel a little bit like a camp counselor, like Julia was saying before, when I say something like Broomland. But a couple of things that are brooming in Broomland are we have a Buy Me a Coffee account, and it's hooked up to a payment account. And we've been making noises about giving people opportunities to support the work that's happening in the Broom. If you're not in the Broom already, that might just look like a podcast which comes out on a frighteningly frequent schedule. I'll say. And a bunch of like social media which comes out in support of the content which gets explicated in those podcast episodes. I'd say like even if you're in the Broom, you might not understand how much work happens in the Broom. And it might behoove me to define what I am referring to when I use the term work. But I'll say that in the Broom, my sense is that a lot of people are able to learn things which help them in their spiritual refinement and or metaphysical development. And I'll say that I can't say that for me that comes without a cost. And I'm also aware that it might behoove me to talk about what I mean when I talk about a cost. But I'll say for now that it takes time. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of discussion and disagreement and a lot of, I'll say like relaxation of karmically induced positions of conflict in order to hold space for that work to unfold. And at the very least, that takes what people refer colloquially as time. I'd say it takes time in the having of those conversations. And I'll say it also takes a ton of time in the practice which allows those conversations to happen in non-rupturous ways, which, for me, I'll say like looks a lot like meditating. And I feel like it probably looks like a lot like that for a lot of people who do the work of tending in the broom and outside the broom. But I'll also say that we have a pretty spicy thread of discussion in the broom right now about the nature of, quote, practice, unquote. Like what constitutes practice, what are the outcomes of practice, if there are outcomes, whether one should attach to those outcomes or not. And if you'd like to join such a discussion, then you can see the show notes or the description for this episode for how to join the broom. But I'll just like jump across many tangents back to the main line, which is to say that, we're in the process of giving people easy ways to support the work that happens in the broom. And you can probably expect to hear more about that soon if you are in a position to hear anything from us. And I guess I'm kind of curious. I'll just like pause there to see if anybody wants to say anything about that, raise concerns. Oh, I got a strong whiff of apple cider vinegar. That feels aligned.
Good for cleaning. That does feel right. Isn't apple cider vinegar really good for cleaning?
I think it's really good for a lot of things. Yeah, it's really good for cleaning.
Cleansing. Is
Really
Hodis
good for
saying in
salad
chat?
dressing. Hodis says
Hodis
it's
saying, oh,
astringent.
sorry.
Sorry. I just drink it by itself sometimes. It's a pretty strong probiotic. Reinvigorating biomes. Yeah, I think we're talking on some level about the reinvigoration of biomes in the broom and outside the broom. And also the apple cider vinegar we have to consume in order to continue reinvigorating biomes. But yeah, all that costs money, costs time. We need money to survive in this material realm, in my experience. And it takes time to make money, and it takes time to tend in the broom. So do the math. Does anybody else want to say anything else about, I'll say like recompensation?
Yeah, what's coming up for me right now is in relation to like what you said, Nobu, about the work that it takes to sustain the broom, keep it circulating with like fresh topics, to like be there, to like, help untangle like rupture, get to the root of that kind of stuff. And it's stuff that I like love to do and love to talk about. And I also am aware, like almost each time I do it, of that dichotomy that like there isn't a world or like infrastructure just yet built for these things to be funded, but maybe there is. And I know that we're discovering that kind of stuff.
Just
Yes.
not just yet.
Not just yet. Okay. But yeah, I don't want to say excited because that would be a lie. I am reconciling.
Don't lie to me, Hannah. Don't lie to me.
I won't. I can't. But yeah, I know. I'm just kind of like aware of it, and I think like, if there are any patrons out there who would like to like sustain the kind of like metaphysical university, I would say, shielding that's being built here in Garden. Um, please inquire with anybody who is open to be inquired with. I'm definitely open to be inquired with. My email is intrepidbuddies@gmail.com. Hit me up. I'm just saying. So, but yeah, I am also holding space to hear from other folks as well and any reflections too. But I'm going to mute now so I can say hi to my sister at the same time.
Hey sis, what's up? Thanks for the...
You said that was intrepidbodies@gmail.com.
I think she did.
Okay, I just wanted to say it slower and reiterate.
Bodies@gmail.com on the email protocol. How the sister says hi. Is there anything else to say on the topic of supporting metaphysical work and the infrastructure that's required to support it? I mean, you got me thinking about universal basic income, but that doesn't feel appropriate for this container. I feel like universal basic income is like one of those things which everybody supports but can't get approved via like governmental process. It's like healthcare and like moderate gun rights. Like consistently when they poll for like public approval of legislation around these things, we're seeing like 60 to 80% approval. But then when it comes to like what we call the process of governing, like they just can't get it through. I'm just treading water while y'all pop off in the chat. Adam says can of worms.gif. Yes. It's funny, I was having a chat in my family WhatsApp recently, and I was just talking about how I tried to talk about psychology and psychiatry with my cousin who's becoming a psychiatrist. And my auntie was like, well, I think that's a difficult conversation. And I was like, I love difficult conversations. And she was like, yes, I know. And we just laughed.
Like, yes, he's always got knives on him.
Don't say anything. Something just happened with regard to knives in Australia, so don't get me in trouble, Adam. I think they
These are
might
metaphysical knives. These are metaphysical knives. My apologies.
metaphysical knives. Yes, if anybody who's listening or trying to like export the contents of a Discord chat so that people can buy it on the grey web, we're talking about metaphysical knives. Huda says, why is it necessary to yell on the topic of money and metaphysical infrastructure and places to exchange such info safely?
On the topic of why metaphysical infrastructure and places to exchange such info safely is necessary, I feel like there's not a lot of places where that happens in a space that is not based on doctrine or dogma.
I feel like there's not a lot of places where that happens, where the space is not based on like the cult of personality of one particularly charismatic person.
That too. Yeah.
That's mysterieschool.com.
Yeah.
I feel like there's not a lot of places where that happens, where the space is maintained by many particularly charismatic individuals, and it's not based on dogma/doctrine.
Yeah.
But I would say the Broom is such a place. I mean, y'all are like very particularly, very particularly charismatic to me. Maybe a little too particularly for the tastes of, the mainstream, quote unquote. But I do feel like that's part of like what allows the magic to happen. Literally. why do you feel like it's necessary to have these spaces, Anna? Like, why even talk about physical stuff? Like,
That's a good question.
are there not enough problems with the physical that we, should limit the time that we're spending talking about metaphysics?
That's a really juicy question.
Thank you.
I was just like kind of letting it sink in, but yeah, and the voice that you asked it into is funny. I personally get the sense that everything that's, for me, everything that's physical is like metaphysical first, or like yeah, everything like originates as something metaphysical, maybe you could say.
I mean, I feel like you're kind of feeling into the contours of the topic that we discussed talking about, but please go on.
Oh, you mean heaven and the astrals?
Yeah, but I want to hear you talk more about this idea that like things originate in the metaphysical and how you would use that frame or perspective to justify talking about the metaphysical when the physical is such a mess. Or let's say like there are things to do in the physical.
I'll just say that like for me personally, there are questions I've asked in my life that have not been satisfied with the physical answers. And for me it's only been when like by being in the broom and like having a better sense of like metaphysical reality that like I feel like I can really like just feel more whole as a person and like understand how to like navigate reality in a lot of ways.
Shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely aligns for me. Because, I feel like the prevailing, let's say, like, economic paradigm sort of assumes that people are, like, rational actors. Right? And I feel like so often it's like people don't behave rationally.
Right.
And the roots of, like, why people don't behave rationally are metaphysical.
Totally.
And by that, I mean,
Yeah.
like, look at the outcomes. And like, if I were to ask people what they care about in terms of like physical outcomes, and then you look at the actual physical outcomes, like not having universal basic income when most people seem to care about universal basic income or better healthcare or moderate like gun control legislation in the USA. Like, it's like, well, you weren't behaving rationally. So like, why did you end up doing the things which led to this outcome where the things you care about are not nourished? And I feel like that is metaphysical.
Yeah. Me too.
Julie says, I like to be informed on reality. I feel like the subtext there is that like the metaphysical is reality. Is that correct?
Can I read what you wrote, Psychonaut, out loud? Okay.
Sure.
Psychonaut says, I would say that I've come to the conclusion hierarchies within occult spaces are largely prefaced around keeping people away from gnosis, and rather than enabling it for a variety of reasons, but definitely to protect those hierarchies. Thus, spaces which boast facilitating the transfer of that knowledge limit it and scare people away from it instead.
Oof.
Which isn't something I have seen in the broom. And for that, I am thankful. I paraphrase that, but I think I made it clearer.
Yeah, I appreciate that reflection. Second up.
Actually, yeah, something that I just like came across on threads like prior to this container was an abbreviation UPG, and I never seen it before, and I looked it up, and it's unverified personal gnosis. I guess that's like a thing. Like I guess that's like a abbreviation that people use.
It's like the official way to do the Dr. Manhattan gif, right?
Wait, what?
Source question mark. The Dr. Manhattan gif about source question mark. I saw it in a dream, but like in fancier language,
What? I'm gonna look at that GIF right now.
I know. I'm like, I don't have a reference
I'm
point for
sorry.
that.
I guess I'm just in stupid spaces where it's ubiquitous. So I didn't mean to like bring something in that is tough to draw to mind.
That's fine. I just don't know the reference. Feel free to drop it though, so I can see.
No, not that one. Not that one. Okay, I'll find it. Sorry. Source meme with Dr. Manhattan.
How does UPG land in your field, Anna, or anybody else?
Well, for me, I was kind of like, isn't that just gnosis? Like, it was just interesting that it was like UPG, like unverified personal gnosis. I was like, isn't that just gnosis? Like that was my reaction. But I'm curious.
Well, I mean, I feel like it creates space for the idea of like verified interpersonal.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
And unverified interpersonal gnosis. Although I would say that the interpersonality of that is the verification.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel many people would disagree. I feel like you could say like a critical mass of interpersonally verified gnosis is like what we tend to refer colloquially as truth. I like this picture, Adam. It's someone who kind of looks like Dr. Manhattan, but kind of looks like a really like jacked Buddha. And it says, "It was revealed to me in a dream."
Source?
And then someone's like saying, like a human, like a mere human is saying source. Yeah. I feel like in the past, like when people have said something that I've said is like UPG or like just UPG, it's kind of landed in a way which feels sort of hostile. And I'd say like in the past like maybe month or so, I would say I've like had much more contact in like very intimate containers with like so-called materialists or rationalists. And the term has sort of like I mean, I'll say like somewhat pejoratively that it feels like training wheels to me. Like it's like it's a safe way for people to like progress towards riding a bicycle and not a quadricycle, which looks like a bicycle that has training wheels on it.
Wait, will you say more about how it feels like training wheels?
Like I think it's like it creates a container for people to actually like interact with things which are not like massively interpersonally verified, which is to say that like most people don't talk about them. So like if someone can be like, oh, so that's like your UPG, and I'm like, if I say like, yeah, it's well, I would say it's like interpersonally verified amongst the few people that I share it with, then we can continue to talk. Whereas I feel like if they didn't have that term, maybe they would just like write me off as a loony or like a
I
wooper.
see.
You know what I mean? But then it's like, if they say that's like UPG, and then I can say like, well, you know, I've shared this gnosis on a podcast called the Broom Radio Podcast, and we have a community called the Broom, and often those episodes are recorded in containers, which I share with like, you know, up to like 10 people. And I feel like those people tend to express a lot of alignment in their own UPG. with like the way I'm expressing my UPG. So then like I can advance the idea that like perhaps like that's interpersonal gnosis. And
I
then I
see.
can perhaps advance the idea that when people have gnosis which is aligned, then that is a valid form of verification.
Yeah,
Um,
makes sense.
that's like how it lands for me, at least. But
Okay,
I feel like it is connected to that topic that we were sort of like tangentializing from, about the importance of sharing metaphysical info for me. And I'll say that, like, you know, like I think a lot of people who like refer to science in a way that I would say like implies belief, or like I'll say like unexamined faith.
Ooh.
What I'll say is that like a lot of the people I know who refer to science that way are not scientists, and like have not been to university, or they've been to university in like non-scientific fields. And I'm not saying that you have to be. I'm just saying like this is what I've observed. And I'll say that the people I know who went to university and even worked in scientific research or studied topics related to science tend to have much less faith in the institutions of science and the outcomes of the labor of those institutions of science than people who don't understand science. And I'll say that like all of those people in my experience tend to have very little understanding of, I'll say, like the roots of science in what was once called natural philosophy. And then I'll connect it back to what the question I was asking about places to share metaphysical info. And I'll say that like the institutions of science and like I'll say like the gatherings which cultivated what we call natural philosophy, which became science as we know it today, were like safe spaces, right?
Mm.
Like there were places where people could be like, well, I've been kind of like noodling on this thing, and like right now it's like unverified personal gnosis, but I feel like some of the things I've heard like Anna talking about seem to align. And then like there's this paper that Adam wrote, which feels like it kind of touches upon some of the things which feel adjacent to my unverified personal gnosis. So I'm kind of curious, like if we can find a time to talk about like commonalities between the things we're touching into, and maybe we can construct a narrative, perhaps through massive empirical verification, but perhaps not.
Oh wow. Yeah.
We can conduct an experiment in order to verify aspects of like the theory that I'm sort of marinating on, right?
Yeah.
And then like Adam might be like, well, what's one aspect of that theory that we can test? And I would be like, well, I have this fancy thing I call a hypothesis that if this condition is present and this condition is present, then this outcome will arise. And then Anna might be like, well, we should get like 500 people together, and then half of them, those conditions will not be present for. And then another half will be some kind of permutation of the presence of those conditions. And then we can observe whether that outcome arises and how it arises amongst that population. And then we can draw correlations between the outcome and the presence or the lack of presence of those conditions. And then if the conditions are, I'll say, like specific enough such that we don't think that the influence of other conditions may be more proximal to the outcomes that we observe, then we may imply that there is a causative relationship between some of those conditions and the outcomes that we observe. And that's basically science, right?
Sounds like it.
But
From first
there
principles.
is like there is a ton of room, I would say, in that formulation of like how unverified personal gnosis becomes massively interpersonally verified gnosis. And I don't think people understand how much room there is there. So when someone does an experiment in like Siberia, and then some website which has a journalist which has like ads popping up all in your face says that like somebody did this study and that these are the outcomes, often in all caps and sensational text, then people are like, oh yeah, that's true. And I think that's what science tends to look like in 2024. But again, like going back to this topic of like, I'll say like the importance of metaphysical infrastructure and safe spaces for sharing, I'll say unverified personal gnosis, which are not dominated by doctrine or dogma, and also not subject to the perspective of a single authority figure or a single charismatic individual. I would say that like much of the science that we see in 2024 being reported upon such that it becomes mainstream tends to be subject to unsafe containers which are dominated by doctrine or dogma and are dominated by single points of failure or like particular charismatic individuals. But that's just my perspective.
Thank you for qualifying it. I was just thinking about when I like first joined the Broom, I used to think a lot about this part of a book that I literally only read the beginning of called Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas. But it really struck like that I got a lot out of what I read, like because I was reading about like Copernicus and like the people that Copernicus was like, you know, it was like over like so many years they were like exchanging letters back and forth. You know, and they were like, you guys, I think that like
you guys
you know, they're just like, you guys, I think we're onto something here, like. But I just remember joining the Broom and I was like, man, we're like Copernicus, you know. Except for there's not, we don't have to like, you know, right, we don't have to like do snail mail and like wait for like 20 years to get a correspondence, you know, like.
Nicolaus Copernicus was a Renaissance polymath, active as a mathematician, astronomer, and Catholic canon, who formulated a model of the universe that placed the sun, rather than Earth, at its center. And I was kind of looking to see how he died, because I would say like a lot of the people who advanced such theories in that time were considered heretics, and often they had very painful deaths.
He definitely was considered a heretic, yes.
And hopefully that doesn't happen. I'll say like I feel very certain that that won't happen to anybody
Lordy.
who ends up in the Broom. Which is not to say that the Broom will guarantee that it won't happen, but I'm also not saying that it won't guarantee that that won't happen in some metaphysical way. But that's just my unverified personal gnosis, bro. Bro Pernicus. Psychonaut says, I'm not even going to ask you for the permission to read it out because I feel like it's kind of metaphysically implicit. I think that the desire to refer to the authority of verification like that, I think he's referring to what I was talking about, is really just a projection of modern concepts backwards, where ancient tradition, open parens, super duper verified gnoses, close parens, were a lot more fluid than many have been led to believe. I'm just going to tumble that around in my metaphysical hands. Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying, I think. And to me, I would say that, like, the need or the perceived need to verify things like this comes from a few different factors, but I'll say, like, living in a more densely populated and interconnected society. He also says, at least in the context of European traditions. But yeah, I guess like what I'm trying to get at there is like, I feel like, yeah, when you were just like a shaman in your community of say like 100 people, then there probably weren't that many people to disagree with you. Whereas like when we live in like very densely populated and interconnected societies, then there's going to be a shit ton more differentiated context, and people may come to like different conclusions about the nature of reality based on their differentiated experiences, such that when you have like one shaman talking about what they perceive reality to be in a set of terms which is nurtured within a particular set of contexts, then somebody from outside those contexts might look at those words and be like, well, I don't think they would necessarily do this in a grounded way, but they might end up feeling like those words mean different things. And so I would say like the language of massively interpersonally verifying things via like measurements and experiments is sort of in some sense, well, was sort of in some sense considered to be like a lingua franca, like a way of communicating the nature of reality using symbols and measurements that were repeatable and somewhat denuded of the particularity of context. But I don't think that's necessarily true, because I would say there's like a lot of papers which have been written based on research which is performed in say like Korea and Russia, which I would say like by Western standards is like very mystical. For instance, like I've read papers which were written by Russian scientists on the healing properties of shungite and the effects of shungite on electromagnetic fields. And I would say that they're partially motivated possibly by the abundance of shungite which is available in Siberia in Russia, aka they're trying to make a market for it. However, I would say that like a lot of Western scientists, or even like Western non-scientists or laity, have never encountered those papers because they're written in Russian. And probably because there's not a lot of shungite in the West. So they can't like find corresponding papers in English, and there aren't like corresponding scientists or industrialists who are looking for those types of papers because there's no market incentive for them to publicize the findings. So I think like that model of like science being like a connective, communicative layer between different cultures is somewhat overly optimistic.
I'm also just thinking about money and science now, since you were talking about markets.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, wow.
Yeah, there's been some really juicy discussion in the room, like in the last week, since I'll say like we created a channel called Politica, which I feel like kind of like lit a little bit of a fire under a channel which is called Money, which is kind of talking about, like one of the things I would say it was talking about was pushing through political action based on an expression of like the financial opportunities available, or at least like through like being able to communicate the cost of not having certain political realities become manifest in ways that people could understand, like in their bank accounts and their pockets. Like the example that came up was like, well, we know what the cost of heart disease is, so that's why we have legislation around things that cause heart disease. And I would say like we don't really know what the cost of, say, like parasocial media induced distraction is, although I think there's some really good work happening around it. But the lack of being able to cost the consequences of like society-wide distraction makes it difficult to introduce legislation around parasocial media usage. And I feel like in a really like abstract way, this is sort of getting to the heart of what Hoda was talking about when it comes to like the connection between money and metaphysical infrastructure. Right? Like if there's no financial incentive for the type of research or even like the type of discussion which may one day lead to being able to, I'll say, forge compelling narratives about what we see as metaphysical reality, then it's very hard for those narratives to get forged. And then it's very hard for those narratives to become popular enough that they can lead to like, I'll say like, adoption on like scales which are massive enough to actually like meaningfully shift like the collective.
Mm. To be
And that's
fair,
like
I
a
was the
very
one that brought in money.
what's that?
I said, to be fair, I was the one that mentioned money, I think. I don't think
Oh
Hoda
yeah.
money. I thought she was asking why is money necessary? And I was just like,
Yeah.
wait, money.
Well, yeah, I was talking about money, and then Hoda asked why it's necessary, and then you asked to clarify, and then Hoda
Yeah.
said metaphysical infrastructure and places to exchange such info. But I was, let's say, like talking about. I mean, we are talking about in some ways like compensating the kind of work that it takes to provide places where people can talk about these things, so that
Yeah.
one day these narratives can be forged and become mainstream.
Yeah.
Hoda says, yeah, there's money in publishing too, and that it co-creates industry from my perspective. I agree. And there's also money in like marketing, right? Like it costs money to get a message out there. And I would say like often the space that is taken up by marketing is used for like things which seem pretty spiritually misaligned. But I don't think that means that those tools are necessarily useless.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of like feeling into a timeline where I try to like make a connection between like all the things we talk about, but I'm gonna hold space. Hoda says, I feel like decoupling the tool from how people use it can be powerful. I cannot disagree. Psychonaut says, and then everyone acts shocked when occult spaces end up being led by unsavory actors when the only people with the money, time, and energy to put those communities together and maintain them are some of the best off, I'll say materially in my interpretation, some of the best
Mm-hmm.
off people in the room.
Oh,
100%.
that's a great fucking poem.
The rich get richer and they parlay their wealth into producing engines that help them to accumulate more wealth. 100%.
What do you think, Adam? Haven't heard from you in a while.
Is there anything in particular? There's a lot that's
I don't
being
know.
discussed here.
I was just wondering how you were doing over there.
Thumbs up or thumbs down?
Give us a rating.
I am in thumbs up territory, firmly,
Swipe left or
proudly.
swipe right? I don't
Now
really
you're getting
know.
personal. Now you're getting
I don't
personal.
know which one of those directions is approval or disapproval because I don't use dating apps. But is there anything more to say about this? I mean, I'll say like for a while I've been kind of talking about the Broom as being a community which is like collectively governed, which also takes a lot of time. But I'll say that like yeah, I mean like I feel like communities can only get so large before they have to become like publishing houses, right? And I feel like this relates to like what we were talking about when it comes to like verifying personal gnosis, and also like the way science is the way it is now. But yeah, I would say that like if that's to come true, then we will probably need to find ways to like feed the broom
Mm-hmm.
so that we can continue to forge those narratives, and like I'll say like forge even more resilient and robust and interpersonally 11 interpersonally verifiable narrative.
Yeah.
And I don't think like the broom is the only place where that's happening. I'm not trying to be like
No.
I'm not trying to invoke some kind of like I don't know, messianic kind of like frame of reference. But it is like a place that I care about, and I feel like there's a place where like some of the pieces of some very important narratives are collecting.
Yeah.
And I will say that that feels pretty unique to me.
Agreed.
So TLDR, if you would like to support the broom, TLDR stands for too long, didn't read, by the way. But if you'd like to support the broom, then we will be talking more about how to do that, and also hopefully talking about what we'll be doing with the money that people use to support us. And also, I would say like eventually talking about like how we distribute that money. If you want to join us and help us and be compensated for it. But I'm looking pretty far down the road.
I love this for us because the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is in Taurus.
Mm.
In tropical
Thank you
astrology.
for acting it in the material. I say that somewhat cheekily because I know a lot of people don't consider that the material, but I feel like it's pretty material.
Yeah.
I'm happy to verify your UPG, Anna.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Does anybody else want to verify Anna's UPG? Does anyone want to scan the QR code on Anna's UPG? UPG is unverified personal gnosis.
Come on.
Come on.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Psychonaut says I'm out of verification coins for this month. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about y'all, but tax day in the USA was April 15th, and that was not a very good day for me. But I feel good about it.
I'm glad.
Um, I guess like I'll move on to another piece of administration, which is that we held a vote in the Broom to rename one of the channels. And this may feel like a pretty small material act, but it feels like a pretty large symbolic act to me. But I would say like the original channel in the Broom, and I think that channel is still like the original channel in the Broom, was called Breathing. And I'll say that that the genesis of the term breathing was I'll say like the server was originally called the breathing room, and if you can't see the connections between the breathing room and the broom, then I won't say much more for you. But I'll say that like before the breathing room was a Discord server, it was a group chat on a platform that used to be called Twitter, which is now called X. And it was a group chat started by someone who recently became a member of the Broom again. And I'm very happy that person's back in the fold in this particular garden. And I would say that the breathing room has gone through many changes, and there have been some ruptures which have occurred in the lifespan of the breathing room. But this channel was called Breathing, and we had a vote to rename it as The Kitchen. And I feel like I could go into like a lot of like the symbolic ramifications or consequences of renaming a channel called Breathing to a channel called The Kitchen, but I'll leave those spaces for y'all to fill in. But I'll say for now that it feels like a clean slate and potentially like a launching pad for something which might, by the will of the divine, track some of the paths that we laid out in our conversation about I'll say like boosting interpersonally verifiable perspectives on the nature of reality. And I just want to hold space to see if anybody wants to say anything about that or ask any questions.
Feels like a complete episode to me.
You mean we're not going to talk about heaven and the astral and those cool Arabic words for the intermediary layer between heaven and earth?
Catch us on the next episode.
I'm happy to have that conversation take place, especially in a different container, but hopefully when two of the members who I would say like have advanced that conversation are present. Shout out to Macha and Ahmed. And
Oh, yeah.
Hoda says, you mean we didn't already? Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's possible to talk without being in those realms, to be honest. But I'm still holding space to see if anybody else is thinking about saying anything or throwing anything into the pot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Julie seems to agree. I mean, I love the way that you framed like whatever you said earlier about like the importance of people seeing reality. Those are my words. I really admire the conviction that you have that reality is reality, and I think it's really important.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
I wouldn't say it's like my orientation, but I think it's an important ingredient in the pot. I feel like I'm getting obnoxious with metaphors right now, so please cut me off. But yeah, do you want to say anything more about that, Julie? Please. I would appreciate it if you said something else about it, either in text or in voice. I'm just reading out what Julie's typing. Kind of putting Julie on the spot, aren't I? Now Adam's typing. You showed it. That was my impersonation of Adam impersonating somebody from like some of the regions of America. I am an American citizen. I am an American citizen. Well, Julie says, well, I feel it goes along with what Anna pointed to about metaphysics priming the physical. Ashe. Priming. Do you want to say anything else about that?
I guess I'll say it's just boring any other way. Like, okay, I get what y'all are putting out there in the 3D, but now what? What else? Give me more. I'm bored, bro.
I love that.
So that's why I like to be informed on metaphysical reality.
Give me more.
That's so fucking incisive for me. It's like, I mean, y'all have heard me go to town on this and why am I like this, but I feel like somebody like Julie saying it's fucking boring is just like even better. Psychonaut says these shadows boring as hell. I cannot disagree. Well, I'm gonna echo what Anna said like about 5 minutes ago, in that I also feel like this container is pretty complete. Does anybody disagree? Sorry if that triggers you, Adam. I'm asking people with me.
So triggered.
So triggered.
Why? Why must you put me in the position to disagree with you? Because I will. I mean, I can't. But like, we want to wrestle.
Well,
I feel like you're saying, go on.
I was just gonna say, I would like to say thank you to anybody who tuned in to this container on the podcast.
And you made it here too, to the end of the track. I said, and they made it here to the end of the track. You know, you here?
Oh yeah.
Oh, you expect me to be here with us at this late minute? Come on now. Happy to be there with you, metaphysically. If you're into that kind of thing, and like Julie said, it is boring without it. Have a little fun too. There's always the noble goal to have a real understanding of reality, to be in the world in a way that actually brings forth things that are healing and restorative instead of just shit. Make sure, Nobu, this is a footnote, that in that container about the astrals and heavens, that we can bring in the janitor cleaning the toilets that you had seen in your dream. If sorry to put you into that, but that's a really important metaphor, I think.
I love talking about my dreams, even though they're crazy and sometimes involve fighting Nordic pixies with knives.
Yes, like the whole thing feels very related to the astrals and having an understanding of it.
Thank you for sniffing and verifying my UPG, bro.
It smells good. It smells good. Just like the Dr. Manhattan source, I saw it in a dream. Done.
I'm going to say thank you as well for tuning in, and thank you all for being here. I am going to invoke Flabberbot Premium Edition, thanks to our patron Podrock, and write us out on a track called Thomas the Trap Engine by JM Beats. And I apologize in advance. I apologize in advance because this sounds like it could be really bad, but I'm going to play it now. Thanks, y'all. Peace.
Down the track we go. Down the track we go. Where it goes, who knows? Got some tank in the wheel. You know what I mean? What is it?
Oh my god, I'm squealing. Thanks, y'all. Peace.